When Sundar Pichai remembered his mother Lakhmi Pichai, the crowd listened deeply. The hall was full, lights shining softly across rows of faces waiting in silence. The stage looked calm but heavy with expectation. Sundar Pichai stood there, his hands resting gently on the podium, his eyes traveling across the crowd as if he wanted to see each person, not just speak to them. For a long second, he did not say anything, and that silence pulled the audience closer, making them lean in as if the next words could change the air itself. He cleared his throat slowly, his voice soft, almost hesitant, like he was opening a part of himself he usually kept hidden. "Today," he said, "I want to share something I rarely talk about. It is about my mother." The sound of those words touched the crowd differently. There was no applause, no movement, only a wave of stillness. They understood at once that this was not going to be about technology, not about success, not about achievements, but about something far deeper. As he spoke, his mind traveled back to the streets of Chennai, to the small home where laughter mixed with struggle, where every day was both fragile and full of strength. He remembered his mother, Lakhmi Pichai, not as a figure standing in the background, but as the heartbeat of the house. She was the one who held everything together when nothing seemed certain. Sundar's voice trembled slightly when he began to recall those nights when there was not enough food on the table, but she would still find a way to make everyone feel full. "My mother," he whispered, "taught me that respect is not about big actions. It is about small kindness that never ends." The audience could almost see the picture forming through his words. They imagined a woman sitting in dim light, saving every rupee, refusing to buy herself a new sari so that her children could have books for school. They felt the weight of her choices, the resilience she carried like armor. Sundar paused, and in that pause, memories flooded his mind. He remembered how she would sit by the window at night, waiting for him to finish reading, telling him again and again that knowledge was a light no one could take away. But not everything was soft and calm. There were storms, too, and Sundar knew he must tell them, because truth is never smooth. One night, when he was still a boy, he heard his parents whispering about money. His father's voice was low, heavy with worry, while his mother's voice was steady but thin. They had only enough for one of the children to attend a better school. Sundar pressed his ear against the wall, his heart racing, afraid of what that choice would mean. He did not know then that his mother had already decided. She sold the small gold chain she had worn since her wedding, a piece of memory, to pay for his school fees. When Sundar revealed this part, the hall grew heavy. People shifted in their seats, some biting their lips, others blinking quickly as if to stop tears from falling. "She never told me this," Sundar continued. "I only learned years later from my father. She sacrificed something that mattered to her because she believed I might have a chance. And that decision shaped the life I live today." His words carried no pride, no boast. They carried humility, respect, and a quiet ache that filled the room. Every listener felt as if they were inside that small home, seeing the silent strength of a mother who gave away her treasures so her child could dream. Then Sundar surprised them. His voice grew firmer, his eyes brighter. "But I must also tell you, there was a moment I almost threw it all away." He stopped, letting the suspense hold the crowd. People leaned forward, curious, anxious. "I was young. I wanted quick results. I wanted to follow friends who laughed at hard work. There was one day when I came home angry, ready to quit studying. I slammed my books shut and told my mother I did not care anymore. I still remember her face that evening. She did not shout. She did not cry. She only looked at me and said, 'You can stop today, but remember, the world will not stop for you.' Those words hit me like fire. I could not sleep that night. Her calm voice was stronger than any anger I carried. That moment held the audience. They knew it well, the temptation to quit, the desire to escape struggle, the weight of choices that decide a future. Sundar's memory was not just his, it was theirs too. Slowly, he told them how those words returned to him again and again, even when he felt lost at college, even when he sat in a foreign land wondering if he belonged. He explained that every time he doubted himself, he could hear her voice, simple and steady, reminding him that the world moves forward and he must choose whether to stand or walk with it. The audience listened as if they were breathing through his memory. His story did not belong only to him now. It was in the hands of everyone in that hall. Some thought of their own mothers, some of their fathers, some of someone they lost too early, and each listener found their own reflection in his pain and strength. As Sundar ended the first part of his story, he looked down for a moment, collecting himself. My mother never asked for anything in return. She only asked me to be kind, to be humble, and to respect every person, no matter their place in life. She said that is the only true success. He paused and let those words float in the silence. The crowd stayed silent, not because they were uninterested, but because they were moved in ways words could not fully reach. And Sundar knew in that quiet that his mother's story had touched every heart. The unseen sacrifice behind Sundar's success. The next morning after that speech, Sundar sat alone in his hotel room. The applause had faded, the lights had gone dark, but the memories did not leave him. He stared at the window where the city stretched wide, shining with success and dreams. Yet his heart felt heavy. He remembered something he had never spoken about in public before. It was not only about what his mother gave, but also what she suffered silently. When he was a teenager, there was a day he could never forget. His school had announced a competition that could give him a scholarship. He wanted to join, but needed special books that cost more than his family could afford. He had told his mother hesitantly, already expecting her to say no. Instead, she smiled, placed her hand on his shoulder, and said she would manage. Sundar had felt relief then, not knowing the depth of her promise. But one night, while returning home late, he saw something that broke him. He saw his mother, Lakhmi Pichai, sitting on the roadside under the dim light of a lamppost, selling small hand-stitched cloth bags she had made from old saris. She had never told him. She had hidden it. But there she was, trying to earn enough coins so she could buy him those books. Sundar froze. He wanted to run to her, to stop her, but his feet felt nailed to the ground. As he remembered this, he whispered to himself in the hotel room, "She gave more than I ever saw, more than I ever thanked her for." The sound of his voice trembled against the silence of the room. On that night long ago, when he finally reached home, his mother acted as if nothing had happened. She gave him food, asked him about school, and spoke softly as always. Sundar could not tell her that he had seen everything. He stayed quiet, but inside his chest, something burned. It was guilt mixed with love, shame mixed with respect. He told the audience later, "My mother never wanted me to see her sacrifices. She wanted me to focus only on learning, not on her pain. And yet I saw, and that image never left me. I carry it even now." The suspense in his words made the hall quiet again. Some people in the crowd placed their hands over their mouths, as if they too had once discovered a hidden sacrifice of their parents. But Sundar continued, and here came the twist. "The truth is," he said, "I almost disappointed her more than once." He explained how, during his college days, he once failed an important exam. The shame of failure pressed so heavy that he thought of giving up. He was afraid to tell his mother. When he finally did, she looked at him with steady eyes and said something he did not expect. She said, "I never asked you to win every time. I only ask you to stand again every time you fall." Those words changed the room's mood completely. The audience felt the emotional beat hit them like a drum. Resilience, kindness, humility. Her voice carried all of it. Sundar described how, after hearing those words, He returned to his books with a new fire. He worked harder than before, not to prove himself to the world, but to honor the quiet strength of his mother. He admitted to the crowd, "My success was never built by me alone. It was built by her sacrifices, by her resilience, by her refusal to give up even when everything looked impossible." The hall grew so quiet that even a breath could be heard. People were no longer just listening to a story about Sundar Pichai. They were looking into their own lives, remembering sacrifices made for them, and realizing how easily those sacrifices often go unseen. And then Sundar leaned closer to the microphone and said something that surprised everyone. "There is one moment I never told anyone until today. It is the moment that still hurts, and it is the reason I speak with this weight in my heart." The suspense thickened. People leaned in, waiting for the revelation. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment and opened them slowly. "It was the day I left India to study abroad. I thought I was ready, I thought I was brave, but what I saw at the airport still lives inside me. I saw my mother standing behind the crowd, holding back tears, hiding them so I would not see. She lifted her hand as if to wave, but halfway she lowered it because she did not want to make me weak. I walked away pretending to be strong, but my heart broke with each step, and I still wonder if I should have run back and held her tighter before leaving." A soft gasp moved across the hall. Some people covered their eyes, some whispered to themselves, some thought of their last goodbyes to loved ones. Sundar's voice grew softer but sharper in feeling. "Sometimes the greatest pain is not what we go through, but what we do not say in the moment we should have." The crowd stayed frozen, caught in the tension between love, loss, and unspoken words. And Sundar knew, in that silence, that he had pulled them not only into his story, but into their own. The lonely road in a foreign land, the plane landed, and Sundar stepped into a new world that felt both exciting and frightening. The air was colder, the faces were unfamiliar, and every street seemed larger than the ones he knew. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but when it came, his heart carried more weight than joy. The first night in the small dorm room was the hardest. The walls were plain and cold, the silence pressed on his chest, and the thought of his mother waiting thousands of miles away left him restless. He remembered how she had hidden her tears at the airport, and now, alone in the room, he wished he could tell her he felt the same pain. He whispered into the night, "Amma, I will not fail you." But doubt lingered in his mind. The next morning, classes began. The lecture hall was crowded with students from around the world, all confident, speaking quickly, asking questions that sounded like answers. Sundar sat quietly in the back, his notebook open, his pen shaking slightly. When the professor asked a question, others raised their hands without fear. Sundar wanted to, but his tongue felt heavy. He thought, "What if my accent sounds strange? What if they laugh?" This fear grew bigger with each day. At night, he would sit at his desk, staring at his books, hearing his mother's voice telling him to stand again after every fall. But still, the loneliness wrapped around him. Then came the moment that nearly broke him. After 1 week, he called home. His father spoke first, his voice calm, asking about classes. Sundar answered with short words, trying to sound steady. Then his mother came on the line. Her voice was soft, filled with warmth, but she asked only one question. "Are you eating well, Kana?" Sundar felt his chest tighten. He wanted to tell her the truth, that food tasted like nothing without her cooking, that he sometimes skipped meals because he felt too tired. But he could not. He simply said, "Yes, Amma." When the call ended, tears finally fell. But here the story took a twist. Sundar decided he could not live with fear. He remembered the night when his mother sold cloth bags under a street lamp so he could buy books. He told himself, If she could sit on a roadside with courage, then I can sit in a classroom with courage. The next day, when the professor asked a question, Sundar raised his hand. His voice trembled, his accent thick, but he spoke. The hall turned quiet for a moment, and then the professor nodded and said, "Good point." Those two words became a flame inside him. But the struggle was not over. Money was tight. Sometimes he had to choose between buying a book or eating a proper meal. He often picked the book. His stomach would growl during lectures, but he kept listening, telling himself that hunger now was a seed for strength later. One evening, as he walked back from the library, the cold wind cutting through his thin jacket, he thought of his mother again. He imagined her sitting by the small window in their home, waiting for his letter. The image gave him power, and he whispered to himself, "I will not let her sacrifices be wasted." And yet, suspense returned. There came a week when Sundar faced his first major project. He worked late nights, typing, researching, but the computer crashed before he could save his work. All was lost. For a moment, he felt crushed. His hands covered his face. His heart whispered, "Quit." But then another voice rose inside him, the steady, calm voice of his mother. "The world will not stop for you." Those words pushed him back to his desk. He started again, building from nothing, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. When he finally submitted the project, it was praised as one of the best. The professor even asked him to share it with the class. As Sundar stood there, explaining his work in a voice that no longer shook, he realized something powerful. Every struggle, every fear, every lonely night had prepared him for this moment. And deep inside, he felt his mother was with him, guiding his steps even across oceans. The crowd listening to him years later could feel this truth. They could see not only a story of success, but the story of pain, resilience, and kindness that shaped it. The call that shook Sundar's heart. It was a cold evening in the foreign land. Sundar had just finished a long day at the library. His body was tired, but his mind was calm. He had begun to find a rhythm, a balance between study and struggle. Just as he placed his books on the desk, the phone rang. His heart jumped. Calls from home were rare because they cost too much. He picked up quickly, expecting to hear his mother's soft voice. But instead, it was his father, and his tone was heavy. "Sundar," his father said, pausing as if the words were difficult. "Your mother is not well." The silence after that sentence felt louder than any sound Sundar had ever heard. His hands grew cold, his throat dry. He asked quickly, "What happened?" His father explained in short words that Lakhmi Pichai had fallen sick. It was not serious yet, but she was weak and the doctor had advised rest. Sundar closed his eyes. Thousands of miles away, he could do nothing. That night, he sat alone, unable to eat, unable to study. He imagined his mother lying in bed, still asking his father to save money, still worrying more about him than herself. The guilt returned like a storm. He whispered into the empty room, "Amma, I should be there. I should take care of you." But he knew he could not go back. His family had spent everything to send him abroad. If he left now, all her sacrifices would mean nothing. That was the cruel choice in front of him: stay and fight for the future, or return and be the son his heart wanted to be. For days, he carried that conflict. He walked to classes, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Each letter from home gave small updates. Sometimes she was better, sometimes worse. He held on to every line like it was life itself. Then came another twist. One evening, his roommate handed him a letter that had arrived late. It was from his mother herself. Sundar opened it with shaking hands. Inside, the handwriting was weak but steady. She had written, "My dear son, do not worry about me. I am fine. I only ask you to stay strong, finish your work, and keep moving forward. I did not send you across the world to see you give up. Every time you feel tired, remember that I am smiling here, waiting for your success." Sundar's eyes filled with tears. He pressed the letter to his chest. Her words were more powerful than any medicine. Even in sickness, she was still giving him strength. He realized then that love was not only about being present, but also about carrying the hope someone gives you. His mother had always carried him in her strength. Now it was his turn to carry her in his determination. He returned to his books that night, his focus sharper, his heart steadier. Every page he read, every problem he solved, he imagined he was doing it not just for himself, but to keep his mother's smile alive. And yet, suspense remained. The illness was not gone. The fear of losing her shadowed his days. Sometimes in the middle of a lecture, his mind would wander. What if she is worse today? What if she needs me, and I am not there? But each time he remembered her letter, and it gave him courage to continue. When he later shared this memory on stage, he told the audience, "The strongest people are not the ones who stand in front of us, but the ones who suffer silently, so we can stand tall." My mother's silence was louder than my loudest cries. The hall grew quiet again. People understood. Many thought of their own parents, of the sacrifices made in silence, of the letters and words that carried them through lonely nights. The chance that tested everything the winter in that foreign land was sharp and unforgiving. Sundar wrapped himself in his thin jacket as he hurried across the campus. The air was icy, but his heart was burning with nerves. Pinned on the notice board was an announcement that seemed too big to ignore, a research competition with a scholarship that could cover his fees. He stared at the paper for a long time. This was the kind of chance that could ease his family's burden. But it also carried risk. The competition was tough. The best students would be there, and failure would not just hurt him. It would hurt the sacrifices of his parents, especially his mother, who was still recovering back home. Sundar walked back slowly, the announcement echoing in his mind. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought of his mother's letter. Her words came back. "I did not send you across the world to see you give up." He whispered to himself, "Amma, this is for you. I will try." He entered the competition. The theme was complex, requiring creativity and hard research. Sundar worked late into the nights, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes falling asleep over his notes. The stress was heavy, but he carried it with quiet strength. Yet halfway through, a disaster struck. One of his calculations was wrong, and it meant starting over. The deadline was close, and he felt his heart sink. Sitting alone in the library, he pressed his hands against his forehead. The thought of quitting whispered to him again. But then he remembered a night from childhood. His mother had been sewing by the window, her hands tired, her eyes heavy, but she kept working until the cloth bag was finished. When he had asked why she did not rest, she had smiled and said, "When something is not finished, I cannot sleep." That memory pushed him up from the chair. He opened his books again, restarted the work, and fought against the hours. The night before the deadline, while others slept, he stayed awake, his pen moving, his mind burning with determination. Finally, as the first light of morning touched his window, he looked at his completed project. His hands shook, but his heart felt steady. The day of presentation arrived. Sundar stood in front of professors and students, his project in hand. His voice trembled at first, but soon it grew stronger. He explained each detail, each idea, and as he spoke, he felt the presence of his mother beside him. He remembered how she had once told him, "Respect comes when you give your best, not when you fear the worst." When he finished, the hall was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. The judges nodded, impressed by the clarity of his work. Sundar lowered his head humbly, his heart racing. Later that evening, he received the result. He had won. The scholarship was his. The relief that washed over him was so deep that tears fell before he could stop them. He called home immediately. His father answered, and when Sundar told him the news, his father's voice cracked. Then his mother came on the line, weak but smiling. She said only one thing. "I told you, Kana. You can stand again after every fall." The crowd listening to Sundar's story years later could feel the weight of that victory. It was not just about a scholarship. It was proof that resilience, humility, and sacrifice could carry a person through storms. And yet, Sundar did not stop there. He told the audience, "That victory was not the end. It was only a step. But it was the step that told me I belonged, that I could walk this road with strength." The room filled with doubt after the competition, Sundar felt a small flame of confidence in his heart. But soon he learned that success always calls for greater tests. One afternoon, his professor called him and said, "There is a seminar next month. You will present your research in front of visiting scholars." Those words should have brought pride, but instead they filled Sundar with fear. This was not a classroom anymore. This was a stage where experienced voices would question him, where doubt could crush him in seconds. As the news spread, some students whispered. Sundar heard them. "He is smart, but his English is slow. He will lose his words on stage." Maybe the professor chose him only by mistake. Each whisper cut him, but he carried the wound in silence. That night, he called home again. His father gave short blessings, but when his mother's weak voice came on the line, he hesitated. He wanted to tell her about his fear, but instead, he said softly, "Amma, I have to speak in front of many people." She replied with calm strength, "Speak as if you are speaking only to me. If your heart is honest, no one can silence you." Her words stayed with him. Every night for weeks, Sundar stood in front of the mirror, practicing his speech. His accent was still heavy, his sentences not always smooth, but each time he faltered, he remembered his mother's line, "Speak as if you are speaking only to me." The day arrived. The seminar hall was filled with professors, scholars, and students. The air felt heavy. Sundar's name was called. He walked to the podium, his heart pounding like a drum. At first, his hands shook and his voice cracked. Some people in the audience leaned back, already expecting him to fail. The whispers he had heard before returned to his mind. But then he paused. He closed his eyes for one moment and imagined his mother sitting in the front row, smiling softly, waiting for him to speak. When he opened his eyes again, his voice grew steadier. He spoke not with pride, but with humility. He explained his research step by step, using simple words, his tone clear and calm. He was not trying to impress them, he was trying to share, as if he was sharing with his mother at home. But halfway, a visiting scholar raised his hand and asked a sharp question that could easily shake anyone. Sundar froze for a second. The room waited, almost holding its breath, ready to see if he would fall. His chest tightened, but then his mother's other words returned. "The world will not stop for you." He breathed deeply, thought for a moment, and gave his answer. It was not perfect, but it was thoughtful and respectful. The scholar nodded. "Good response." That small approval changed everything. Sundar's confidence grew. His voice gained strength. His explanations flowed with clarity. When he finished, the hall gave him applause. Not polite applause, but real, strong applause. Later, one of the same students who had doubted him came to him quietly and said, "You proved us wrong today." Sundar only smiled humbly and said, "I was not trying to prove you wrong. I was trying to prove my mother right." When he shared this moment years later, the audience felt the weight of it. They saw that true strength does not come from defeating others. It comes from honoring those who believed in you when no one else did. The return home years passed. Sundar's name grew, his work gained recognition, and the world began to know him. Yet inside, one thought never left his heart. None of this belongs to me alone. Every step forward still carried the shadow of his mother's sacrifices. When he finally returned to India after many years, the air smelled of memories. The streets, the noise, the small home he had left, all came back to him. But what mattered most was seeing his mother again. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, her body weaker than before. Yet her eyes, steady and gentle, were the same. When Sundar stepped into the room, she tried to rise, but he rushed forward and held her hand. For a moment, no words were spoken. It was only silence, a silence filled with years of distance, longing, and unspoken gratitude. At last, Sundar whispered, "Amma, I am here." Her eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would come. I always knew." That night, the family sat together. Sundar looked at his mother across the table and felt something rising in him, something he had carried for too long. He took a deep breath and said, "Amma, I saw you once, years ago, selling bags on the roadside. I never told you, but I saw. I knew what you gave up for me." She froze, surprised, then lowered her gaze. "You were not supposed to know. I wanted you to walk forward, not to carry my burden." Sundar's voice broke. "But Amma, your burden is what gave me strength. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered you. I remembered your voice, your sacrifices, your silence. Everything I am, everything people know me for, it is because of you." His mother's tears fell quietly, and for the first time, Sundar felt he had truly spoken the truth of his heart. The next day, he was invited to speak at an event in India. The hall was filled with thousands of people, leaders, students, families, all waiting to hear from him. Sundar stood on stage, but this time he asked his mother to sit in the front row. He began his speech not with technology, not with achievements, but with a story. He told them about a woman who had sold her wedding chain, who had stitched bags under a street lamp, who had written letters of courage even when her body was weak. "That woman," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "is my mother. Everything you see in me is only a reflection of her strength. I stand here because she stood strong when life tried to break her." The hall grew silent, hearts heavy with emotion. Many people wiped their eyes. Sundar then walked down from the podium, took his mother's hand, and lifted it for everyone to see. "If you wish to clap," he said softly, "clap for her, not for me." The hall erupted in applause, thunderous and endless. The sound was not for Sundar's success, but for the sacrifice and resilience of a mother whose love had shaped a son and, through him, touched the world. His mother smiled through her tears, her frail hand shaking slightly as she looked at her son. In that moment, Sundar felt something deeper than pride. He felt peace. Years of silence, struggle, and sacrifice had led to this one moment where the truth was spoken, where the world finally listened, and where his mother's story shone brighter than his own.